Hello, welcome to Tech Review's video. We're doing another video, or this is actually part 2 update video for our SQLite demo that we did a short time ago. As you recall, let's just go to the builder. Well, I've added a lot of things. The original one in part 1, we had set up so that you can add several different UI text fields. In this case, we're only using 2. We're using a name and we're using an age. When you save, it's going to make sure the database is open and created table, and it's going to take that record and save in the database. And also, when we did a get data to where it retrieves everything in that database and puts it to an array which coordinates with the table view, so it'll list on the table view. So with this one, as you see, I've added some things. So I've added a delete button. I've also added to where using the table view delegate select row. So when you select something in the row, or an item in the row, it will actually come back and put it back into the appropriate text fields, which is up here. So once these are populated, it flags it as editing. So when you edit, now you can, if you want to actually delete it, you can either hit delete and it'll delete that record and update the list, and it'll be off, and it'll be also out of the database. Or if you hit save, or you can, once it's in here, if you make a change, if you change the age or change the name and hit the save button, it will, of course, change the database and refresh the table view. So I've made a few changes. Let's start with the .h. The only ones I've really added from part 1 are, of course, is editing, just to flag to where when you select an item, it will say, change the is editing, so it's a yes, and that way you can test to whether it's editing or not, or edit mode. And also I've added another dictionary. When you edit, I just take that one item and all of its keys or columns from our database, the name, all of the columns, including the item, into here, so that when we have quick and easy way to have our editing object. Using to do whatever we want to do. We update it, we need the ID, update certain columns, we want to delete the whole thing using. So again, it's very easy to retrieve the information that way. Everything else stays the same. We have the same database, table name, columns. We have our buttons. The only one I added was this one. The action corresponds with this red delete button that I added. So that's new as well. And in here, we have the open database, create a database, or create a table, excuse me. And we have the add. So what I changed was an update table, which essentially is the add table. It just has its own format because it still uses table, as you see, and it still uses the column values from the dictionary, because of course we want to retrieve all the values, or new values in this case, from that record, whether whether the user changed it or not. And the other one I added delete. So we're going to delete from a certain table name with an ID, which is based on whichever item is based on the ID from the database, so that it just deletes that one item. And I made clear all text fields so that it actually, when I run that, it clears all of them rather than just clearing individual. Because if you do an update and if you're just dealing with one field, you want to just clear one. You want to clear everything to do with that record. So I just do a clear all text fields, and that'll clear it. Um, I also created a SQLite execute. If you recall, in the add items table, when you do a MySQL3 execute statement, you use the database, and you want to execute your query SQL statement that you've created based on the insert statement from the string. So being that it's using the same one for not only inserting or adding, you want to update and also you want to delete. I created one method that all three of these will just use once it creates its own query SQL. I put it into here so that we can just run it and we can use this multiple times. So with that, go to the .m, and we'll start at the top. In the synthesize list, I just added the two items that I added, the is editing flag and the editing object. And the view did load. The only change I did was to set the is editing to no and to create our editing object. Everything else, the table name, database name, even the column names I'm leaving is just name and age. So all of this is still the same. Now let's take a look at the database methods that I did. When we did add, once we created and set up the insert statement, we had that in here where it said insert SQL. So that was a string. So instead, because we're going to use this statement here multiple times, I just have this return true or false if it did it, and it will. We can just call this method for either adding with a certain query SQL or SQL statement, or deleting or update, and then it'll trigger this and fire this off. So it just makes it a little bit easier. So here is our update. Say here's the insert. So once we had the insert statement, which is this, instead of doing everything that did, all I did was we just can call this now with our string, and if it returns true, of course it's added, yes, and I run the fetch button, action button itself, so it will refresh. The easiest way to refresh, because the fetch button does that, it will refresh our table view, and of course it returns true or false, or yes or no. So that's the insert, but now updating, it uses the same object, but instead it's going to have, instead of using insert into values, of course it has a different format. So we only need, in this case, the column val set. Instead of columns that, I just used one. I guess we could have done one there, but we also need the ID from the key, or from the database ID, so we know which one we're actually updating. So the value object, when we gathered the information, and I'll show that in a minute, we added that to the dictionary, NS dictionary, as object key ID. And of course that's a string, but we want it as an integer, so we do it as an int val. It's stored in the dictionary as an object string rather than value, so we have to convert it back to integer. You have to use int val to convert it to an integer in order to use it. So as we did with the update, or this is the update, the insert, we want to, using value object and the keys, do a loop. We loop through, but because we already have the ID, we actually want to skip, because of course in value objects where we got it, we have the ID. we don't need to deal with that again. So as long as it's not the ID, which is that's why this is here, the key name, I mean, we're going to use that as the current set. So for instance, if the user changed the name and the age, or if they had other columns, it'll go through and add the necessary set of the column value for the update statement. So if you change just the name, it'll just be one thing. If you change the age and the name, it'll have two things, and so on and so forth. So and of course, it puts in the layout or format as the key name and the value of that key name, which is here, which is, as you see, update, which is the first one's the table, the next one's a column set, and where is the ID that we got from here. We want to match the ID with the ID that we're currently dealing with, to just update that one specifically. So once we have all of the column set, we want to have commas, or separated by comma, delimited, but only up to the last one, as we did with our add insert statement. So this just sets up again the string so that we can use that, sets up our column set and use it to set up our string in here, so that when we execute our MySQLite execute statement with our string, as long as it updated, it'll still return yes, and it'll refresh the list. So again, with delete, essentially the same type thing, except instead of dealing with columns and values, the only thing you want to do is delete a certain item if you have it. So you want to pass the table into it, or table name, with whatever ID you want to delete. So if you use the way I set this up, we're actually not using it, but if you pass, instead of when you call delete from table with the table name, if you leave the with ID as a negative value, we're going to test for that, so that if it is a negative value, it'll actually set up our delete SQL string format as delete from the table, and it's actually going to delete everything from the table. So if it has an ID, meaning greater than that negative, it's going to set it up using delete from, but it's also going to add our where, and where our ID is specific to the ID that we pass. So it's actually just going to only delete that item. And once we have that, as long as it's not blank, that's what this statement is, I do an execute and use that SQL string, set deleted to yes in our return, so that it knows that we did indeed delete it, or deleted flag, I should say, and then I run the or execute the fetch button action button again, so that it refreshes the list. So with that is really all that we need. And again, they're very similar, so really you could kind of condense them, but because they're different formats, I left them separate, so that we have, the update format gets this here, the insert, the delete doesn't really have a format, or a very basic simple one. So that's really all we need to do as far as the actual command or the methods. So the other things that I added were our our table. That's right, the did selected row path. So when you select from a table, you want to just edit a certain item. So we want to take that item, and we want to put the values back into the text or the text field, appropriate text fields, so that we can either edit and change, or we can just delete it. So when we do that, again, here's our loop through our subviews in our view, and just looking at our UI text fields, since you can have multiple ones and we're not actually setting them up as a reference. We're just looking through the UI text fields. And we want to take the tag, because the tag is how we actually mark it to correspond with the index of the columns. So in this case, since we only had a couple of them, especially name and age, I used a switch statement for the current tag. So again, 0 will of course correspond with name, 1 will correspond with the age. So we want to set the appropriate set text. We want to just take the object or the object that you of the data list that from the index path row that you selected, just the name, and you want to populate that with to this specific name UI text field. Same thing for the age. It's going to take just the age and put it into here. And of course, when you do that, you want to flag the is editing to yes, so that you can mark it and test for later to see if you're editing or not when you hit the save button. And also what I do is I add to the editing object, I just take the data list object at the index path row, just that specific object as the value, and I just call it key name current item. So we just have that item that we're dealing with. When we do save, well, where's our save button? And save, here we go. So when we do a save button, same as before, we test for the table, make sure it's open, or make sure it's okay, make sure our database is open. We still are using our dictionary with our columns and values. So we want to go through again our UI text field, views, subviews in our view, and we want to, we've resigned the first responder if it's open, or if it's a first responder. Gather the tag and the column name. We always want to get the column name because we want to compare the column name and the values for our object up here. So that's just using the column name and this specific tag. So it's again paired off with that. And the changes now are, I made this by default blank, so that I added this top area here, so that if we're editing, it's going to do this stuff in here. If it's not, it's going to actually always get the field or the text from the UI text field, store it, and of course it will be, or if it's not blank, of course, it'll actually add, so that it'll add that column name as a text field. So back up to here, if it is editing, I test first to see if that editing object is not null. I get the current text of the UI text field, and we have to compare the two. If it's the same, we basically don't want to change it. So we don't want to change the fields that are necessary. If you just change the name, or just change the age and not the name, we want to know which one's changed and just edit accordingly. So that way we do that in here with just an is equal to string, the current text from the current item, and that specific column name that it's on. And if it is changed, then of course we want to add it to text value, which is going to give the value for this specific UI text field. So when it does, the check, and if it's not blank, it's going to add it to our object columns values with the value and the key name. So now when we're editing, we're only going to have the columns and values of whatever has been changed, is what is going on here. And then now moving on, once we have objects and columns, the same thing as we did for add. If there is something here, then it'll, if it's not editing, it's going to come down here and do the same thing it did before, and just run the add items to table, close the database. If it is editing, we need to have what ID of that editing object. So we need to get the editing object current item, the key name, which is the ID, and we need to have that so that we can edit the correct record. Now, once we have it, then we already have the table name, so we can do the update table using the table name. The column names are just the object column vowels, which you pass, as we saw before. That's how we set it up into our correct format for our statement. Then if it updated and we got a true value, it's going to close the database, and we have to flag the editing to no. And what I do is I clear all text fields so that the text fields are clear or blanked again. And the one thing I did, and I changed. The only change I made to the fetch button is I needed to get, when we get our information to our data list, instead of just a string, where's our output? Let's see. Result output. So instead of the output, last time it was NS string. So instead of just a string, I needed to actually have a separate fields so that we can pull from those, as needed, pull whatever you need. So I made it a dictionary instead. And because we're using the ID, which is an integer, I created an item ID, and since we know the ID of the first column is the ID, when A is 0 in the current, it's going to not only say, as before, we did column text, and that gets the value for text. So in this case, it's not a text, it's an integer. So we want to grab the integer, but we do want to add it as to the dictionary, so we want to actually make it formatted as a string so we can store it in the dictionary for later use. So item object, string with format, and here's the item ID. So we can just take the item object and the current column name, which in this case is the ID, and then at the next pass, when it goes to the other columns, it'll be the name, the age, which are all text, which will do this, which it did before, just adding, instead of adding it to a string, it actually adds it to the dictionary object. So then we take the entire dictionary object and add it to the data list, so that we'll have access to all those fields. And the same thing, it's going to close the database, get the number of rows if that's changed, and then reload our table view. When we delete, we want to delete whatever is in those boxes. So actually, I should have done is actually test and do our nice little loop as through, where is it? Go through and find just the UI text fields and make sure that there's something there. Or I guess we can even just say, because I tested for the ID, the editing object is going to be ID, but you want to pair it off and make sure that that is what it is. So if you actually cleared your text field, you don't want to, you want to only use that. So you could do another test. But for this video, we're just going to do it this way. Again, delete button, same thing. If the database is open, we're going to go ahead and do it. Get the editing object, because we've just clicked on it from the table view. It populated the fields. We have our editing object. We want to get just the ID, but again, we don't want the string. We want to do an int val, so we want the integer version of the ID. And then once we have the information, we have the table name. So we can call our delete from table with a table name with our ID, and it should delete that, return a yes, and it will do the fetch, which refreshes the list, clears the text fields, and sets the flag now to no because everything's clear. So it should reset everything. So let me run this. Okay, so here is the the simulator running. So if you do our get data, here are our, and of course you see I've changed some of our items. But if you click now on an item, well here, let's just add Thomas Jones. And we're going to do 52. So we hit save, it resigns, and now here's our Thomas Jones. So if we want to change Henry Swanson, and when we click it, say now we're editing, so now it populated the name and the age, and we want to change it to say 28. And now when we hit save, it clears it, but also if you look at Henry Swanson is now 28 because it refreshed the list. So if you want to delete, say, Fred Jones, it's going to come up here, and instead of updating it, you want to hit the delete. Now, the delete button, as we saw, well, actually it's right here, should delete just that item. So we hit delete, and of course we have the clear all text fields, so that's good. So it did it, and it's not in the list. So you get data. So with that, that concludes this video. So thanks for watching, and more to come.